Hello everyone, my name is Lily, and today I'm going to tell you about a chapter of my life that I will never forget. Every time I think about it, I get a heavy feeling in my heart, and I can't help but blame myself. It's a story I wish I could erase, but life doesn't always give us that choice. It all started years ago, when I was 18 and living with my family in Italy, a city as beautiful as it is mysterious. At the time, I thought I had everything. My family was well off, and both my parents were successful in their careers. My father was a successful businessman, and my mother was an accomplished interior designer. Despite their busy schedules, they always made time for me and my two older twin brothers, Mason and Noah. Mason and Noah were 2 years older than me, and if I had to describe them, I'd say they were both incredibly charming and handsome. I've always felt lucky to have them as brothers. As the youngest in the family, I was spoilt by my parents. They made sure I had everything I could ever need, whether it was material or affection. But if I'm honest, the love my parents showed me, as wonderful as it was, never felt quite the same as the love I received from Mason and Noah. Their bond with me was something unique, something special. Before we dive deeper into this story, don't forget to subscribe to my channel to hear more fascinating true stories. Make sure you watch to the end and show your support by hitting the like button. Trust me, you won't want to miss this story. They were more than just brothers. They were my protectors, always looking out for me. The way they loved me seemed deeper than my parents' love because they always expressed it through actions and gestures that came from deep concern. My parents loved me by giving me a comfortable life, but Mason and Noah did more. They really understood me in a way that my parents sometimes couldn't. When I was sad, they knew, even if I didn't say a word. They were always the ones I could confide in without fear of judgment. When I was younger, if I fell or was bullied at school, Mason and Noah were the first to step in and defend me. Once I was taunted by classmates because of a dress I was wearing, and when I came home crying, they didn't just comfort me, they went to the school to confront those kids. They didn't use violence, but their sharp words and cold demeanor made sure those kids never bothered me again. They were like heroes to me, always ready to help whenever I needed them. I remember the evenings when our whole family would get together, but I always wanted to sit between Mason and Noah. They'd put their arms around me, and sometimes they'd playfully argue about who should sit next to me. They used to joke about me, calling me their little princess and vowing to protect me for life. As time went on, I began to realize that their love for me was different from that of others. They were also the first to help me through my teenage insecurities. When I felt insecure about my appearance, Noah would spend evenings teaching me how to apply light makeup and reassuring me that I was beautiful just the way I was. Mason helped me pick out clothes and always called me the sweetest little sister in the world. They made me feel valued, and their love was special in my eyes. They weren't just my brothers, they were my emotional rock. Whenever my parents were busy working, Mason and Noah were the ones who took me to school, helped me with my homework, and made sure I never felt lonely. Late at night, when I couldn't sleep, I would knock on their door and they would always greet me with a warm smile. Sometimes they would tell me funny stories or just sit with me until I drifted off to sleep. It was these little things that made me believe that their love for me was far greater than anything I had ever received from my parents. But that love, the one I believed to be pure and innocent, would eventually lead to a haunting experience that changed everything. I'm not sure anyone will really understand, but when I was 18, something happened that completely changed my life. I will share the rest when I find the strength to face that part of my memory. I remember it so well because we were so close. As the youngest in the family, I often did silly things without fear of being scolded. Sometimes I would suddenly jump up and give them a hug or casually sit on their laps when they were sitting somewhere. Mason and Noah weren't just my brothers, they were my closest friends, people I never felt shy about showing affection to. One afternoon, a warm summer's day, I walked out of my bedroom. Sunlight streamed through the large living room window, creating a peaceful atmosphere. Mason and Noah were sitting on the sofa, concentrating on the television. I didn't know what they were watching, but they looked very engrossed. Without thinking, I approached them and rubbed my eyes. They didn't notice me approaching, so I mischievously jumped on the sofa and sat down on their laps. At that moment, Mason was startled and Noah burst out laughing. "Little sister, what are you doing?" I chuckled, said nothing, and sat comfortably on their laps, resting my head on Mason's shoulder. "What are you two looking at so intently?" I asked, but didn't get an immediate answer. Looking at the screen, I realized it was a romantic film, and at that moment the film was reaching its emotional climax. The two characters on the screen were embracing and sharing a passionate kiss. Seeing me staring at the screen, both Mason and Noah became uncomfortable. Noah smiled shyly and quickly covered my eyes with his hand. "Don't look, Lily." "This isn't a children's film." I laughed and tried to wriggle out of his grip. "I'm not a child anymore, I'm 18, I teased, although I secretly found the scene quite interesting. I continued to try and peek through Noah's fingers, laughing and teasing at the same time. At that moment, I unconsciously moved my hand to balance myself on Noah's lap. Intentionally or not, my hand brushed against something in his pocket. The hard, warm sensation startled me, and my heart raced. I quickly pulled my hand away. I didn't dare look at Mason or Noah. "I'm sorry," I stammered, then quickly stood up and ran to my room. I slammed the door behind me, my heart pounding. I sat on my bed, wondering what had just happened. The image of the remote control in Noah's pocket kept replaying in my mind, making my face flush. Was I overthinking it, or was it an accident? I didn't know, but the shame and embarrassment lingered, and I couldn't bring myself to leave my room. The thought of what Mason and Noah might think of me kept me in my room, unable to shake off the image that haunted me. It wasn't just the physical touch, but the uncomfortable realization that I had crossed a line I never even knew existed between us. The closeness we shared seemed to have a fragile boundary, one I had never thought about before. That evening, after hiding in my room for a while, I decided to go down to the living room. I was getting hungry, and I knew my family was probably waiting for me to join them for dinner. But the events of the afternoon still lingered in my mind, and I felt a bit embarrassed. I kept wondering if Mason and Noah were thinking about what had happened, but then I reassured myself that maybe it wasn't as serious as I thought, and perhaps they had already forgotten about it. I opened the door quietly and tiptoed down the hallway, hoping not to meet their eyes. As I approached the living room, I stopped to listen for any sounds. The room seemed empty, so I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking they were probably in the kitchen or somewhere else, not paying attention to me anymore. I tiptoed into the living room, looking around, afraid I'd catch their gaze. But to my surprise, no one was there. How strange, I thought, and stopped in front of the sofa where I had sat with them earlier that afternoon. I was still trying to figure out what channel was on the TV when suddenly, from behind, two faces leaned down, looking in the same direction as me. "What are you doing, Lily?" Noah's voice rang out right next to my ear, making me jump. Mason laughed loudly from the other side, adding, "You look like a thief." I let out a small scream from the shock, turning around to see them standing right behind me. Their sudden appearance nearly made my heart stop, and we all jumped out at the same time. Noah and Mason looked at me, then burst out laughing, while I could only hold my chest, both scared and amused. "Oh my God, you two scared me to death," I said, pretending to be angry but unable to suppress my laughter. "Feeling like I just got teased unexpectedly? What about you? You look like you're up to something shady." Mason raised his eyebrows, smiling mischievously, and Noah patted my head teasingly. "You're not planning on eating something, are you?" I laughed along with them. At that moment, the awkward tension from the afternoon seemed to fade away. I reassured myself that what I had touched earlier must not have been what I thought, because otherwise, the two of them wouldn't be laughing like this. With that thought, I felt a bit of relief and tried to act as if nothing happened. I was just, checking to see if anyone was here. I smiled brightly, trying to change the subject. What are you two doing behind me? Are you trying to scare me? Noah shrugged, pretending to be serious. Yeah, I just wanted to scare you a little, but I didn't expect you to get so startled. Mason added, his voice playful. Who would have thought you'd jump up like that? Your face was priceless. We all burst out laughing. The atmosphere became lighter and more cheerful. At this moment, Mason placed his hand on my shoulder and said, Okay, let's go eat. The whole family is waiting for you. I nodded, smiled, and followed them into the kitchen. The family was already gathered around the dining table. My parents smiled gently when they saw me come in, and I sat down, feeling the warmth of the kitchen and the peaceful, cozy environment. During dinner, the conversation was full of laughter. My parents talked about work, while Mason and Noah occasionally teased me with light jokes. I joined in, and the feeling of embarrassment from earlier seemed to have completely disappeared. After finishing dinner, I helped my mother with the dishes before heading to my room to prepare for bed. As I lay in bed, I reflected on the events of the afternoon and the teasing just now. Although I still felt a bit embarrassed, I no longer felt anxious. I smiled to myself, reassuring myself that it would be okay. Mason and Noah are still the best brothers I've ever had. With that, I fell asleep peacefully. Things weren't quite over the next morning. There was only a thin wall between my room and Mason's and Noah's, so even the smallest sounds, like films or music, could be heard. I was known for sleeping late, but this morning I woke up early, 8 a.m. At first, I thought I was still dreaming, or maybe the sunlight through the curtains was blinding me. But no, after a few minutes of waking, I realized there was a strange sound coming from the next room. My room was between Mason's and Noah's. Our house had thin walls, so even the slightest sound traveled easily. I was used to hearing them playing or talking, but this time the sound was different. At first I assumed they were watching an action film, but the longer I listened, the more certain I became that something was wrong. The sound wasn't like typical film noise. There was a strange rhythm to it, sometimes long, sometimes short. My heart began to race, and a thought came to me that made my face turn red. I didn't want to believe it, but the sound became clearer. It wasn't music, and it wasn't normal speech either. Even though the walls blocked the sound, I could still hear fast, sensual sounds mixed with heavy breathing. I tried to tell myself to ignore it, but the more I listened, the more certain I became that Mason and Noah were watching something special. A wave of shame washed over me. Why am I awake? Why did I have to hear this? My heart was racing and I felt like I was on fire. I put my hands over my face, trying to stop the thoughts that kept invading my mind. That's private, I told myself. Everyone has seen such things, even me, but hearing it from her room makes me uncomfortable. We had always been close, and I never imagined I would be in this situation. I didn't want to hear it, but the sound seemed to cling to me, clearer and clearer. I sat up, got out of bed, and quietly opened my door. I didn't know what to do, but I couldn't stay still any longer. I walked quietly down the corridor, trying not to make any noise. But when I reached Mason and Noah's door, the sound became so clear that it felt as if the walls had disappeared. I stopped, not knowing what to do. My heart was pounding, and I felt embarrassed, confused, and uncertain. I had always known that these things happened, but to hear it from Mason and Noah's room was completely different. I bit my lip, unsure if I should go back to my room or stay where I was. Curiosity got the better of me, and I leaned against the door, trying to calm myself. The sound only grew louder, drawing me closer. Suddenly the door swung open, and I jumped back in surprise. Noah was standing in front of me, his eyes wide with shock, looking like he'd been caught in something he shouldn't have been. We stood there, facing each other, for what seemed like an eternity. The silence was unbearable. Noah cleared his throat, trying to break the tension. "Lily, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice nervous, avoiding eye contact. His face was flushed, and I could tell he was as embarrassed as I was. I couldn't look at him either. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could barely get the words out. I was just passing by," I stammered. It didn't sound very convincing, but it was the only thing I could think of at the moment. Just then, the sounds in the room suddenly stopped. Mason came out from behind Noah, his face as red as Noah's. They both exchanged glances, trying to find the right explanation, but no one said anything. The awkward silence was overwhelming, and I forced an uncomfortable smile, trying to hide my embarrassment. "I was just passing by," I repeated. "Nothing. I'm leaving." I turned and walked away quickly, eager to escape the situation. When I got back to my room, I quickly shut the door. My face was burning, and my heart was still racing. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I leaned against it and took a deep breath. My heart was still racing, and a strange, embarrassing feeling washed over me. I couldn't stop replaying the awkward scene in my mind, the image of Noah opening the door and Mason's expression as he stepped out. The atmosphere between the three of us was thick with tension, and I couldn't shake the feeling. I kept wondering what they were thinking about me at that moment. Maybe they felt as uncomfortable as I did, or maybe even more so. What bothered me most was that I'd overheard something I shouldn't have. It might have been an unfortunate accident, but I feared it would change the way I saw Mason and Noah, my two closest companions, my brothers, my protectors. I put my hands over my face, trying to block out the negative thoughts, but the more I tried to ignore them, the louder they became. I told myself that this was just an unexpected moment, something that no one wanted to happen. Maybe I was thinking too much, but I couldn't help it. I stood up and paced my room, trying to shake off the unease. "It was just an accident," I muttered to myself, as if trying to convince myself that it wasn't a big deal, but deep down I felt like something had to change. Something had to make this feel normal again. Just then I heard a knock at my door. My heart sank. I knew it couldn't be my parents. They didn't usually knock when they needed me. It had to be Mason or Noah. I took a deep breath and tried to calm my nerves before opening the door. When I did, I found Noah standing there, still looking flustered, his eyes averted, clearly trying to regain his composure. He was scratching his head awkwardly, a shy smile on his lips. "Lily, I'm sorry about what happened earlier. It's not what you think. Mason and I were just watching a film, and maybe the timing wasn't right." I stopped for a moment and looked at him with hesitant eyes. His face was flushed, his gaze uncertain, and I could hear the confusion in his voice. Then Mason came up behind him, his face showing the same shyness and embarrassment as Noah's. They both tried to find the right words, but the tension was so thick that we couldn't seem to speak. It felt like we were all waiting for someone to break the silence. I realized that if this awkward moment continued, it would only get worse. So I took a deep breath and decided to break the ice. I smiled, feeling a little embarrassed but trying to sound casual. "Come on, I didn't mean to make things awkward," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "Don't look so tense. I was just passing by, really." Noah and Mason exchanged glances, silently communicating with their eyes. After a moment, Noah sighed and smiled faintly. "Are you sure, Lily? Don't you feel uncomfortable?" he asked, his voice full of uncertainty. I immediately reassured her, trying to ease her worries. "No, I'm fine. In fact, I think I love you both even more," I added quickly, trying to make them laugh. They both looked at me in surprise, and for a moment there was a silent understanding between us. Then I thought of a way to make things less awkward. I took Noah's hand and pointed to Mason. "Let's go into my room and talk for a bit, shall we?" "Let's call that making up for the awkwardness," I suggested. Both of them were surprised by the suggestion, but after a short pause they nodded. It seemed the only way to break the tension. I smiled and turned and headed for my room, the two of them slowly following behind. As the three of us sat down on my bed, I decided to lighten the mood with a joke. I looked at Mason and teased him. "So, the film was so good that you both lost track of time?" Mason laughed awkwardly, covering his face with his hands. "Come on, Lily, stop teasing. It's just, we didn't think you'd hear it." "Really?" "I thought you turned it up so I could hear it," I said, raising my eyebrows playfully. This made them both laugh, and for a moment the tension seemed to disappear. After chatting for a while, I felt my curiosity get the better of me. I looked at Mason and Noah and wondered if I should bring up the thought that had just occurred to me. After a moment's hesitation, I worked up the courage to ask, "How about we try it like in the movies?" The words slipped out before I could stop myself, and I immediately regretted them. I wasn't sure how they would react, but curiosity got the better of me. Mason and Noah turned to look at me with wide eyes, surprised at what I had said. "Are you serious?" Mason asked in a confused voice. He seemed like he couldn't believe I was suggesting something so bold. I nodded, trying to keep a straight face. "I was just curious. It wouldn't hurt to try, would it?" I said, though my voice was fading and I couldn't look them in the eye. "No way," Noah replied quickly, his tone firm, and they both looked away from me. I didn't give up, though, and gently squeezed their hands, trying to reassure them. "Just try it once. I really want to know how it feels." They were silent for a while, and I could see the conflict in their eyes. After a moment, Mason sighed and said with a look of helplessness, "Okay, but just this once, and we have to keep it a secret. No one can know." The room fell silent. We all just sat there, breathing quietly, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. We began cautiously. Every movement, every action was cautious, but also full of a strange energy. I'm not sure how much time passed, but it felt as if the world around us had disappeared, and it was just the three of us. When it was over, the sun had risen high and filled the room with light. We didn't say anything. We just lay there, breathing evenly. The awkwardness I had feared was completely gone. Instead, I felt a deeper connection between us, as if we had just been through something intense together. We went into the kitchen to prepare lunch, and everything felt strangely natural, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But inside, I knew that the boundary between us had shifted, and instead of regret, I felt a new bond, one that brought us closer than before. Mason looked at me with a gentle smile. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. I nodded and returned his smile. "I'm fine, and I think I love you both even more," I replied. The words made me blush, but they held my hand warmly, their eyes full of affection. "We love you too," they said, and we continued to eat. From that day on, there was a subtle but clear change in our relationship. The closeness we had shared was now something else, something deeper. There was no awkwardness, and it was as if an invisible distance between us had disappeared. Every time our eyes met, I could feel a new understanding, a closeness that had never been there before. But deep down, I knew that what we had done was wrong. We had crossed a line, unknowingly breaking the boundaries that society and morality had set. I tell myself it was the impulsive curiosity of youth. I don't try to justify it, but it was our emotions and curiosity that led us down this path. I don't regret it, but sometimes I still feel a vague fear. We don't talk about it anymore, as if it's an unspoken agreement to leave it in the past. The way Mason and Noah look at me now is different. They treat me more gently, more carefully, as if they are afraid of causing me pain. And as for me, every time I meet their gaze, my heart races, caught between excitement and unease. Our curiosity has led us down a path we never expected. While our bond has grown closer, I know it has also changed forever. Looking back, I see how my impulsive actions left a mark on our relationship, a mark I can never erase. We crossed a line, guided only by our emotions and curiosity. Although no one else knows it, I can't escape the truth within myself. Every reflection brings the same realization, how naive I was. That thought remains, a constant reminder. What I've come to understand is that curiosity is natural, especially when you're young. But not all curiosity should be acted upon. Some boundaries are there to protect us from making mistakes that can leave lasting scars. Boundaries aren't there to limit us, but to protect the most precious things in life. Sometimes holding back and staying grounded is the wisest course. My story is a reminder to think carefully before acting on fleeting desires. Strong emotions may pass, but their consequences can last. Cherish the relationships you have and don't risk them on fleeting impulses. True love and lasting bonds are built on respect, understanding, and a shared sense of responsibility. These are the foundations that matter most.